Hi, 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 hi. Hi, if anybody's here, hello. Say hi. We'll read some scary stories. Hi, Lisa H., my boo. Ready to get scared? Get creeped out? See if we get a couple more people or not. We'll do it even if it's just us three, us two. Okay? Hey, Nicole Griffith. Hey, Larky. Hey, Steph Burns. Come on in, people. Don't be scared. Don't be scared. Nothing to be scared of. Come on, guys. Come on in. Got some stories tonight. Hi, Heart Made Wise. Virtual hug. Hi, Farm White. Hello, Danielle C. That's cute. Okay. Oh, come on, guys. I'll start reading. Maybe they'll come in, okay? That's fine. We're in our own little world. I like the ghosts. Those are cute. Super cute. Cute, cute, cute. Alicia, are you here? Alicia Bisa. Hi, Taco. Well, thank you for being here, Taco. I really appreciate it. Oh, here we go. Trying to get comfy in this chair. Ugh. Okay, I already looked for some stories. Hi, Denise. Hi, Tina Bina. Ready for some spooky stuff? Okay, let's see. All right. This one's called Ghost Baby. Thank you, Taco. Hi, Mary. So happy you woke up. So glad. Goat stories are bad. Okay, this is Ghost Baby out of Orlando, Florida. Okay. She hated walking home past the cemetery at night. Oh, Lisa, this puts me in mind of you right now when you said you were walking past walking in the cemetery at dusk. But their family was too poor to own a car since their father had lost his job in the financial crash of 1929. I hope I didn't read this one. No, I don't think I did. If I did, please tell me. Okay? But I don't think I did. The Great Depression, they were calling it. And to her, the term depression had a double meaning. It was how she felt when she realized she had to drop out of school and get a job, any job, to help put food on the table for her large family. She hated giving up her dream of going to college and studying to be a nurse, but she was the eldest, and her mother was an invalid and too weak to hold down a regular job. So she got work waiting tables at a local restaurant, and every evening she walked home past the cemetery. I don't think we read this, did we? It was an old cemetery and very creepy, with looming tombstones, many old and broken, strange statues. Hey, QB. And carvings on the headstones. Dark shadows seemed to follow her as she walked past it each evening. There was one particular statue of an angel that watched her wherever she went, with blank eyes that still seemed to register her every move. It made her skin crawl every time she saw it. She had always thought angels were beautiful, but in her mind, this angel statue represented death, and she hated it more passionately than she had ever hated anything in her life. The cemetery had come to typify everything that was currently wrong with her life. She tried to work the day shift so that she need not pass the cemetery at night. But when one of her fellow waitresses got sick, she was forced to do double duty at the restaurant and walk home past the cemetery after dark. For the first week, she managed to find someone walking her way each night so that she had company when she hurried past the graveyard. But 10 days after her shift change, no one she knew was heading that way. Still, she told herself, it was early enough for businessmen and women to still be walking the streets. Someone would be there when she arrived. Lisa H. in her footprints. As she turned into the street where the cemetery lay, she realized with a painful thudding of her heart that she had been wrong. There was no one else walking there that night. The street was deserted, and aside from the pools of light, okay, Danielle, sleep good. Sweet dreams. And aside from the pools of light cast by a couple of street lamps, it was quite dark. She stopped at the crosswalk, frozen with dread. She could see the line of tombstones, the looming statues, and halfway down the street, she could dimly make out the figure of the angel of death. She swallowed against bile that rose at the back of her throat. She couldn't walk down that empty street. She couldn't. Shudders of terror ran through her thin frame, and she clutched her coat against her body with shaking hands. A cold breeze swirled down the road and bit right through her. In the pool of light underneath one of the street lamps, she saw the white petals of a flower whirling in a tight circle, as if they had been picked up by a whirligig. Well, good morning, Alicia Biso, my boo-boo, foster child. It was all that remained of a funeral lily. At the sight of the floating petals, she leapt back around the corner and stood with her back pressed against a building, heart pounding in terror. She would go back to the restaurant where it was warm and light. Perhaps she could phone the neighbors, since their own phone had been shut off when they couldn't pay the bill. One of the neighbors would surely run across the street and ask her father to come walk her home. She drew a shuddering breath and sighed in relief at this plan. And then she heard it, the wailing cry of a baby. Now, this isn't the one where the baby was still in the grave and the mom was feeding it and it was alive. This is totally different. Just so you don't think we've already heard this. She froze, the goosebumps crawling up to her arms, to her shoulders, the hairs on her neck standing on end. What was a baby doing in a cemetery on a chilly winter night? I know I'm in. But she already knew the answer to that, and her feet, unbidden, were already turning the corner and walking down the empty street toward the cemetery. More than one infant had been abandoned by its parents since the Great Depression hit. Maybe they couldn't afford to feed it, or perhaps it was born out of wedlock. The cemetery was as good a place as any to drop an unwanted infant. All the compassion within her, the compassion that made her yearn to be a nurse, was aroused by baby cries. She would rescue it and take it to the nearest hospital. She couldn't just walk away, no matter how creepy she found the cemetery at night. Now this one's giving me chills already. It's giving me goosebumps. She searched the shadows for the source of the sound, bent forward against the strong, cold wind that whistled down the street. In the light of the second street lamp, she saw a bundle lying on a raised tomb. It was not just any tomb. No, it was the tomb that had the statue of the angel of death looming over it. She gulped, her knees weakening so that she staggered and fell against the lamppost. She couldn't do it. She couldn't walk up to that tomb right under that angel, but she had to. The baby gave a lusty cry, and the sound pierced her heart. She pushed away from the lamppost. Hi, Deborah. And hurried through the gate into the cemetery. She kept her eyes fixed on the squirming bundle lying on the lid of the tomb, trying to ignore the statue of the angel, which followed her with its eyes. She snatched up the baby and cradled it in her arms, gazing down into its chubby round face. Its blue eyes were full of tears as it looked up at her. It gave one last little whimper and then stopped crying. Hush, little one, she whispered. You're safe now. The baby weighed hardly anything at all, she marveled, turning quickly away from the flickering dark shadows beneath the angel. She hurried toward the gate, anxious to leave this horrible place. With each step, the baby in her arms weighed a bit more until the arms felt leaden, and she was afraid she would drop it. She staggered, slowing with each step, and glanced down again at the infant. And I hate when these things pop up. Stop. Okay. She staggered, slowing with each step, and glanced down again at the infant. The face she saw made her gasp in horror. It was the twisted, leering face of an old man. Scraggly white hair sprang all over its head, writhing as if it were alive. It grinned at her through withered lips, bearing sharp fangs, and one tiny clawed hand flashed upward and raked across her cheek. She screamed in pain and horror, throwing the terrible imp away from her. The bundle hit the ground with a thud, and red smoke began billowing out of the blankets. She screamed again and ran for her life, pursued by a flaming cloud of smoke that smelled of brimstone and ashes. The flaming form had taken on the figure of a tiny, demonic man. She leapt through the cemetery gates, and the flaming figure bounced off the empty space between the gates, as if it were an invisible wall. Instantly it vanished, and she fell against the lamp-post, shaking with sobs, her legs trembling too much to hold her upright. Here's a picture, illustration. Ghost baby. You see the baby down there at the bottom of the statue. The whole world had gone silent, save for the heavy gusting of the breeze. A few flower petals flew out of the cemetery and whirled around the lamppost, and into the silence came the wail of a baby. Glancing involuntarily toward the cemetery, she saw the bundle reappear on top of the flat tombstone. All the strength returned to her legs in a flash, and she ran down the haunted street and all the way home. She raced through the kitchen door and slammed it shut behind her. Her mother took one look at her bleeding cheek and hurried over, exclaiming in horror. Her whole family gathered around the table as her mother cleaned the 3 claw marks on her right cheek with antiseptic and carefully bandaged the wound. "A ghost baby," her father said, holding tightly to her hand. "That was a ghost baby you saw in the cemetery. I'm sorry, honey. If I'd known such a thing was haunting that cemetery, I'd never have let you walk home alone." "What's a ghost baby?" her younger brother asked, as she buried her head against her father's shoulder and wept unashamedly. "I don't rightly know, son," her father replied. "Some folks say it's the spirit of an infant that died before its time. Others say it's a demon from hell, come to lure unwary victims into its lair to kill them." "Oh," gasped her wide-eyed brother. "I think you had a close escape," he said to his weeping sister. "I think so too," she said, straightening up and wiping her eyes. "I don't ever want to walk down that road again, Papa," she added. "You're not going to," her father said firmly. "I'll talk to the neighbors tomorrow. I'm sure they will drive you to work and back if your mama will babysit for them once a week." "You think they will?" she asked hopefully. "I know they will," her father said firmly. And they did. For the next 2 years, her neighbor's handsome son drove her to work each morning and picked her up from work at the end of her shift. And when her father got a new job and she was able to go to college, her neighbor's son drove her to college too. They married a month after she graduated, and she went to work as a nurse when they got back from their honeymoon. So the ghost baby did her a good turn after all, but she never went near that cemetery again. No, that's my furnace. The furnace is on. It was windy earlier today, but no, just the furnace. That was kind of creepy, right? Okay, here we go. The Phantom Coach from Tallahassee. You got one there? Yeah, it was good, huh? Creepy. Judd was over the moon the day he learned that Tess loved him, absolutely over the moon. She was the prettiest girl on the whole plantation. She could take her pick from any of the men who flocked to her door, and she had chosen him. It was amazing. Every chance he got, Judd would pick wildflowers for her. dance with her under the palm trees, sing love stories to her. She'd giggle and preen and call him honey. He melted like ice cream in the hot sun when she called him honey. Creeped you already, Alicia? My bone incinerator. Lisa H., are you going to be thinking of that story when you walk by the cemetery? They planned to be married in June, and Tess was sewing every moment she could spare from her house duties, making a wedding quilt and other items they needed for their new home. And when he wasn't bone weary from working in the fields, Judd was building them a small cabin of their very own with the help of his friends. It was a wonderful time, full of love and courtship. I know, I do. I wish they had creepy sounds on here. Need to get. I wonder if I could get them on my phone. Hold on. I bet I could. Morning, Lisa D. About a month before the wedding, a couple of Judd's friends suggested they throw a big jamboree on Saturday night when they were done working in the fields. It sounded like fun, so they passed the word around the cotton fields, and someone ran the news up to folks working in the big plantation house. Everyone was real excited about the party, and they discussed it all week. On Saturday night, the girls hurried to their cabins to dress in whatever finery they had, while the fellows washed up and then came to escort their ladies to the jamboree. With Tess on his arm, Judd knew he was the envy of everyone as they walked around, as they walked toward the big open space at the center of the plantation for the dance. One of the lads had his fiddle and another had a drum. Someone showed up with a recorder and other instruments were produced. Within moments, the impromptu band was hauling and scraping away at a favorite tune, and Judd whirled Tess into the crowd to dance. The moon was full, and the smells of stew and dumplings and other good food came from the tables where the older ladies were chatting as they set up for dinner. Someone had put a barrel of moonshine on a large stump next to the tables. Oh my, he was happier than he'd ever been in his whole life. Hi, New England thrifter. 1 second, guys. One second. Sorry. I don't know. Don't you hear like a wolf or something outside? That's weird, isn't it? Oh, Lex, we know that would be a coyote because we don't have wolves around here, you know? We'll just go on reading, guys, like we don't even hear it. Lexi's laughing. She thinks that's funny. Like we don't even hear it. The jamboree was in full swing when they heard the jingle of a harness and the sound of horses' hooves coming along the lane. I do remember that, New England. The musicians faltered and everyone stopped dancing. Lexi, will you make sure that's not out in the front yard? You see anything?
No.
How about you have the porch light on?
Yeah, I turned the light on.
You think it's in that woods across the street?
I don't think there's any howling.
You don't hear any howling? Maybe it went away. Huh? You probably scared it off.
Probably. It was loud.
Yeah, very loud. You know? Yeah, I don't hear it anymore.
Probably did scare it off.
You saw nothing at all?
It stopped when I turned the light on.
Oh, that is creepy. I've never heard that around here. Have you? Very weird.
Yeah.
Bigfoot's dog. Look at Alicia. She's scared. Need my teddy bear. Oh, Tracy, it was wonderful. I have the video here on my channel where Apple's singing. It was a talent show, actually. Hi, Kathy from Texas.
Hello. Did you guys hear the howling or no?
I think they did, because I was hearing it. They said they did. They said it sounded like as soon as you opened the door that it stopped, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, everything is changing in the world.
Yeah.
We could start having wolves around here where we never did. We have fox and we have
Yeah.
coyotes. We've never had wolves.
Well, that'll be fun.
That will be. Yeah, they heard it. A flock of seagulls. Lisa, look at Lisa D. Lisa D gets scared very easily too. She does. She gets really scared.
Hi, Garnet.
I love you too, New England Drifter. We're glad you and Steph come around. I guess I'll get back to my story before it gets too late. The jamboree was in full swing when they heard the jingle of a harness and the sound of horses' hooves coming along the lane. The musicians faltered and everyone stopped dancing. As the music died, folks around the eating tables turned to see what was wrong. Everyone watched as the carriage lanterns drew closer and closer, revealing a team of horses pulling the master's carriage, driving up the lane toward the jamboree. By the time the master halted the horses, there was complete silence in the meadow. I know she's a scared Lisa H. I've come to the jamboree, the master announced, swinging down from his phaeton, what I don't know, but a horse or whatever, and throwing the reins to the man standing nearby. Please don't stop dancing on my account. He waved imperiously to the musicians, who glanced uneasily at one another, and then resumed the tune interrupted by the master's arrival. Yes, Alicia, elementary. I knew it. I knew it. Slowly, folks returned to the impromptu dance floor, and the master clapped his hands and nodded in approval. One of the housemates brought him a mug full of moonshine, and he downed it in one gulp. After a few moments, everyone began to relax, but the jamboree did not return to its former exuberance. Everyone was too conscious of the master to let go and truly enjoy themselves. Judd and Tess stopped dancing and went over to get some stew, steering clear of the master, who sometimes pestered the beautiful Tess when she served in the house. But the master was not to be avoided. He was already on his fourth glass of moonshine, and when he saw Tess around the table from him, his eyes began to gleam. Tess hastily put down her glass and grabbed Judd urgently by the arm, whispering, "Quick, let's dance." Before he could lead her to the dance floor, the master was looming in front of them. The master pushed Judd aside, grabbed Tess around the waist, and caressed her inappropriately. Judd's eyes bulged at the sheer audacity of the man. Anger roared through his gut. Tess was his girl. They would be married in June. How dare he? How dare he? Lisa. Judd barged forward, yanking Tess out of the master's arms and throwing the master back against the tables. The master landed in the stew pot, and the table broke under the impact, throwing the master to the ground and covering him in soggy dumplings. For a moment, the master gaped at Judd, his mouth wide open with shock. Then the master leapt up with a drunken roar and dove head first into Judd's stomach. The fight was on then. Several men tried to pull them apart, but Judd had a lock on the master's head and wouldn't let go. The master was pummeling him left, right in the ribs, which made it hard to breathe. Then the master slid down unexpectedly, throwing Judd off balance, and he tumbled right over the master's head and landed on the ground. The master was on top of him at once, and they rolled back and forth, first one and then the other, gaining the upper hand. The rolling took them onto stony ground, just as Judd slammed a left hook against the master's jaw. The master's head jerked back and struck a stone underneath him. The master froze, and all expression drained from his face. He went very still. Head face. 50 Shades of Master. Judd gasped and sat back on his knees, unsure of what had just happened, but feeling a sinking sensation deep in his gut. Two men dragged him off the master and then reached down to help the master up. They froze in much the manner of the master a moment ago. Judd knew by the look on their faces that the master was dead, but he did not know how or why. His final blow hadn't been hard enough to kill the man. When they moved the master at last, Judd saw the answer, a sliver of rock about 5 inches long and sharp as a stiletto knife had pierced through his skull when his head whipped backward from the punch. The men had to tug at the master's hair to lift his head off the knife-like stone. To Judd's amazement, the wound bled very little and seemed to disappear beneath the master's hair, leaving just the smallest trace of blood on the sharp sliver. At that moment, Tess raced to Judd's side and grabbed hold of his arm. One look at the master's limp body told her what had happened. Fiercely, she whispered to the men standing over the master's body, Judd was defending my honor. It was self-defense. One of the men grouped around the dead master was Tessa's father. He looked at his daughter, looked at Judd, and then shouted to the crowd, "The master's just stunned and drunk. Let's get him into the carriage and take him home." Tessa's father nodded to the other fellows in the group. Together, they lifted the master and walked him back to, I guess, his carriage, we'll call it, because they call it something else, Phaeton, keeping their bodies between the crowd and the master and sticking to the darkest places in the meadow. Within minutes, the coach drove back up the lane with the master in the front passenger seat and Tessa's father and Judd in the driver's seat. "This never happened," Tessa's father said quietly as they got down from the carriage, leaving the dead master in front of the mansion. "The master died during the ride home from a heart attack or something. The family will find his body in the morning." Judd nodded uncertainly. "Will someone tell the authorities about the fight?" he asked as they started walking back toward the jamboree, which had picked up enthusiasm and volume with the departure of the master. "No one will tell," Tessa's father said firmly. He was the unofficial head man of their slave village and the foreman over the cotton fields. His word was law among the slaves on the plantation. No one would tell. To Judd's surprise, the doctor ruled the death a heart attack, and the master was buried with all the pomp due his elevated station in life. The son took over the plantation, and life resumed a normal pattern. Yeah, the master. Judd had tried to break things off with Tessa, not wanting her to marry a marked man, but Tess insisted they go through with the wedding. 8 weeks after the jamboree, they were living in their new cabin and sleeping under the wedding quilt she'd stitched so diligently. 2 days after the wedding, Judd was kept late in the cotton fields and was walking home in darkness when he heard the familiar rattle of a carriage coming up the lane. The moon was full, and he saw the light from the carriage lantern swinging back and forth with the motion of the horses. But, he realized suddenly, there were no horses pulling this carriage. There was just an empty harness, jingling and tugging as actively as if there were invisible horses within it. And looming in the driver's seat of the black coach was the pale, glowing figure of the old master, his withering face empty of expression, just as it had been when he was impaled by the sharp stone. The phantom's blue eyes were opened, and they were fixed blankly upon his killer. There was no malice on the face. It was just blank and dead looking, which somehow made it even more ghastly. Yeah, Lisa D, here it comes. Judd's body trembled cravenly at the sight of the master. His throat tensed so hard it choked him, and his breath came in great gasps. Just when he thought he was free and clear, the dead master had risen again. Suddenly, the carriage swerved, and the master and his invisible team barreled full speed toward Judd. He gave a mighty scream and ran for his life, the invisible horses on his heels. Judd fled down the dark lane and raced right through the slave village with the phantom carriage behind him. Every family came running to their door to see what the fuss was about, and everyone screamed in panic when they saw the dead master chasing Judd through the village. Judd heard Tess shouting his name, but he didn't even slow down. He raced past the last house and dived into a narrow gap between the trees, hoping the phantom carriage could not follow him yonder. But the dead master and his invisible horses rushed onward, moving effortlessly through the broad trunks of trees and impenetrable vines and bracken, while Judd stumbled and cursed and got caught on branches and tangled up in briars. By the time he burst out onto the lawn of the mansion, he was a sight. Tattered clothing, bleeding from multiple scrapes, bruised and in every limb, and the phantom carriage remained at his heels. Just when Judd thought his lungs would burst right out of his chest and his heart shatter into a million pieces from sheer fright, the carriage reached the driveway in front of the manor house. It pulled up to the front door and vanished in the exact spot where Judd had left it 8 weeks ago. Holy shit. You can run, but you can't hide. Judd fell onto the grass, panting desperately as he gazed up at the full moon. Lord, that was close. He knew one thing for certain. He wasn't staying another minute on this haunted plantation. Better to risk the uncertainties of a runaway slave than certain death by ghost. One more encounter of this kind would kill him, sure enough. As soon as his legs would hold him, Judd walked back to his house, packed a bag, and headed north for Canada. Tess went with him. There was a hue and cry when the two slaves were discovered missing, but no one in the slave village blamed them for running, and fear must have lent Judd extra cunning, for they were never caught. Let's see. Folks hereabouts reckon Judd did the right thing because the phantom carriage showed up again next month during the night of the full moon with the old master in the driver's seat, urging his invisible horses up the lane to the mansion. There's only a ruin now where the old plantation house once stood in magnificence. But each month, on the night of the full moon, the phantom carriage still makes its way through the tangled overgrowth toward the place where the old master's body was dumped so long ago. And here's your illustration. I can't get, there we go. I hope they took the wedding quilt, Kathy. Shorty's in Canada. I'm going to read one more and then that's going to be it. Let me get another thing of water. We're going to read Dark Dreams out of Miami, Florida. Right here. Yeah. We'll be at probably about an hour. That probably won't even take that long to read it. That's 5 a.m. here. Yes, I get every drop out. Shelley laughs at me. Hi, Nana Patty. I guess you were tired. You'll be awake for the auction tomorrow. And Kathy from Texas slept through it too. 6 here in Georgia. Okay, our last story. Dark Dreams, Miami. Elena was sitting at the kitchen table with her mother, planning the menu for her engagement party, when her father walked in and told them to pack immediately. Elena and her mother looked up in alarm. It was early 1959, just a few days after the new government had taken over Cuba, and they were all feeling nervous about what the future held for them. "What do you mean, pack?" Elena exclaimed. "We're going to your uncle in Miami," her father said, exchanging a serious look with her mother. "Tonight." "Is Uncle Juan ill?" Elena asked. Uncle Juan was her favorite relative. "Pack, Elena," her father said, pointing to the stairs. Caught up in the urgency of his manner, Elena hurried toward the stairs. Then she hesitated and turned back. "We will come back in time for my engagement party, yes?" she asked her father. He didn't answer. He just pointed again toward the stairs and then turned to speak to her younger twin brothers, who came running from the living room to find out what was happening. Elena hurried up to her room, her heart pounding. Something was wrong. She could feel it. She wished with all her heart that Roberto, her betrothed, was here. But he was studying at the university and she wouldn't see him until he came home for their engagement party. Perhaps there would be time to call him before they left. Her mother came into the room as Elena tossed clothing into her suitcase. Pack important things," her mother said quietly. "Your photo albums, grandmother's jewelry, the painting you made in art class last year." Elena paused with the shirt in her hand, staring wide-eyed at her mother. Why did she need to pack all those things for a quick trip to Miami? These were things that belonged at home, not in a suitcase. Elena felt a clutch of fear in her heart. "Mama, what's happening?" she whispered. Her mother swallowed hard. Alarmed, Elena realized that her mother was fighting tears. "Clothes aren't important, Elena," she said, avoiding the question. "Clothes can be replaced. Bring your grandmother's icon," she directed, gesturing to the lovely icon that had been handed down for generations in the family. Elena's grandmother had given it to her only granddaughter a few days before her death. It was Elena's most cherished possession, excepting only Roberto's engagement ring, which she wore on her finger. Elena packed carefully, leaving behind most of her clothes in order to fit the carefully wrapped painting and icon. She added the framed picture of her and Roberto at the last minute, throwing away a pair of sandals she had never liked much so that it would fit into the suitcase. Then she locked the suitcase and carried it downstairs. "Good night, Ellen." Her father and mother were packing the twins into the car with their suitcases when she stepped outside. Papa took her heavy case and put it into the trunk. Then he locked the front door and started the car. "Where's Tulia?" Elena called anxiously from the back seat. Tulia was the much-loved family dog. "Roberto's parents will take care of Tulia for us," her mother replied. Relieved, Elena sat back against the seat and watched her father turn into the street. Her mother gazed back at the house as they departed, and Elena realized she was crying. Elena broke out into a cold sweat, and her hands started shaking. It was almost as if her mother didn't expect to see the house ever again, which was nonsense, wasn't it? Elena hugged herself tightly, rubbing her hands over her arms to calm the chills that were running through her. "Oh, Roberto, I wish you were here," she thought. He would know what was going on. Roberto was smart. While Elena paid attention to her schoolwork and to the love triangles and other scandals among her school friends, Roberto paid attention to politics and business and the word on the street. They were opposites, which is why they fit each other so well. She would phone Roberto as soon as they got to Uncle Juan's house, Elena decided. Never mind the expense of the overseas call. Elena began putting two and two together during the journey to Miami when she overheard her parents talking about Fidel Castro. Just a second, guys. She had paid more attention to Roberto than the news about Castro's rebel army. But even she knew that Castro was now in charge of the new government. Her father, a university professor, had been very outspoken in his views against Castro. Was that why they were leaving Cuba? Uncle Juan had a small house that was already filled to the rafters with his 4 children and his in laws. It was a tight squeeze for Elena. Make sure I didn't. For Elena and her family, who were used to their large, spacious home in Cuba. Still, they managed somehow. It swiftly became obvious to Elena that her parents were not going back to Cuba, not with all the terrible things the new government was doing. According to news from back home, Castro's government was seizing private property, nationalizing public utilities, tightening controls on the private sector, and closing down all opposition newspapers. Soon, all radio and television stations were under state control, and no reliable news could be obtained that way. Kind of like what's going on today, isn't it? Letters from Roberto were few and far between. His parents had lost their home at the same time the government had seized Elena's house. His family wanted to come to the United States, but their money was gone. They had a hard time making ends meet and could not afford to leave. Roberto assured Elena that he would come to Miami as soon as he could and that they would marry and make a new life for themselves in America. Elena clung to that hope, even as she struggled to improve her English and graduate from the American high school. Oh, she was still in high school. She found a job as a waitress to help support her family while they tried to make a new life in a new land. 10 months after they arrived in Miami, her father was able to move them out of Uncle Juan's house and into a place of their own, which made things much more comfortable for everyone. Almost a year to the day on which they had fled Cuba, Elena had a strange dream. She dreamed that Roberto was pushing a small, ramshackle boat into the water with the help of his younger brother and their cousin under the cover of night. They rowed out into the ocean as quietly as they could and then started the motor. There were a few duffel bags in the bottom of the boat and some food and water. The whole endeavor looked dangerous to Elena. The boat was leaking, and it was far too small to be daring the ocean waves. Roberto looked older than she remembered him, and there were new, grim lines around his eyes and mouth. He looked determined and a little bit scared. Elena wondered what he was doing. Where was he going? Night fishing? Unusual for Elena, she remembered her dream when she woke the next morning. It had seemed so real. And Elena and Roberto had looked so different from the way he looked in the framed picture that she had brought from her room in Cuba, the picture that she kissed every night before bed. She went to work in a thoughtful frame of mind, wondering about her dream until the lunchtime crowd drove it out of her head. The next night, she dreamed again. In her dream, she saw Roberto and his companions sitting in the small boat under the light of the full moon. The motor was broken and leaking oil into the water. The boat was being pushed hither and thither by the ocean waves. The 3 men were shivering in the cool ocean breeze, and their supplies were running low. Occasionally, they tried to make headway with the oars, but they weren't getting anywhere fast. Elena could feel Roberto's thirst as if it were her own. His mouth was so very dry after a long day in the sun with no shade, but there was almost no water left. They had to ration it carefully, lest they die of thirst in the middle of the ocean. As she watched, Roberto reached into his pocket and pulled hold out a tattered picture, her picture. His longing for her was so intense that Elena cried out to him, Roberto, Roberto. Here's the illustration. Shows two men sitting in the boat and one lying on the floor. One lying there up in the bow of the boat. She was shaken awake by her mother, who had heard Elena calling out in her dream. Elena clung to her mother, tears rolling down her cheeks. She told her mother what she had seen in her dream. Roberto was trying to get to Florida, she explained, but the boat engine is broken down and he's so thirsty, Mama. That was the worst part of the dream. I could feel his thirst. Elena broke down completely then, sobbing in her mother's arms until she fell asleep. In the morning, she begged her parents to alert the Coast Guard to look for Roberto and his brother and cousin. Her father and mother promised to try. That evening, a series of storms rolled in from the sea. As the black clouds roiled above the landscape, Elena clasped her rosary to her lips and prayed desperately for Roberto, somewhere out at sea. Please, God, she prayed, please keep him safe. The third dream started almost as soon as Elena closed her eyes that night. Roberto was adrift in the ocean, clinging to the wreckage of a small boat. There was no sign of his brother or his cousin. He was weak from hunger and thirst and was finding it hard to hold on to the fragile boards amid the fierce storm waves. On the horizon, he could see lightning flashes and hear the thunder. Another storm was coming. Elena woke with her heart thundering in her chest. Hang on, Roberto, she gasped aloud. Hang on. She ran into her parents' room, shook them awake, and told them what she had dreamt. We asked the Coast Guard to look for them, her father reassured her, rubbing his eyes sleepily. If anyone can find them, it'll be the Coast Guard. Right, Lisa D? Never a good sign. Just seeing what you're so happy about. Pray God, whispered her mother. Elena tossed and turned the rest of the night, worrying about Roberto and the storm and praying that God would bring her beloved to her side. It was almost dawn when she awakened from a light sleep by a voice calling her name. She rolled over and blinked sleepily. The voice had sounded like Roberto's voice. Had he made it to Miami? Elena sat up and saw Roberto standing at the foot of her bed. His clothes were soaking wet, and his eyes were sad. He better be alive. He didn't speak. He just looked at her tenderly and touched his fingers to his lips, as if blowing her a kiss. Then he vanished. Ugh. For a moment, Elena lay frozen in her bed. A chill ran through her body as she realized what her vision meant. Roberto had drowned in the storm, and his spirit had come to tell her goodbye. She covered her face with her hands, curling into a ball and screaming aloud in pain and despair. Immediately, her parents came running into her room, followed by her brothers. Through their sobs, she told them what she had seen, and they all crowded into bed with her, trying to comfort and reassure her. It was only a dream, they said, only a dream, but no one believed it. 3 days later, Roberto's body washed up on a small island off Key West amid the wreckage of a small boat. According to the Coast Guard, he had drowned after his boat was destroyed during a storm. The bodies of his brother and cousin were never found. That's sad. That's a bummer. Thank you guys for coming. Really appreciate it, and I love you guys. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Love the laughs. Bye, guys. See you next time.